Chances are you've heard of Piano Safari from a piano teacher friend raving about its unique approach to note reading, and you're like, I gotta check this out, and maybe even hopped onto the website, but were immediately overwhelmed by the vast selection of products and maybe the price tag. Well, don't worry, the Tattooed Piano Teacher has got you covered. I've ordered the books, I've done the research, and I'm hoping that by the end of this video, you'll understand how this method book series compares to other popular piano method series and what makes it a truly unique approach, my personal opinion, and who I think should check it out. So make sure you stick around to the end. So first we dive into a comparison of the Piano Safari method series compared to other piano methods. And we're going to be using my 10 categories for comparing piano method books. And as always, we start with pacing. Piano Safari moves rather quickly through many of the concepts and skills. So compared to other piano methods, I would say that Piano Safari has a fast pace. Here are some specific examples. Students starting level 1 are immediately introduced to eighth notes, and also syncopation is introduced quite early on in level 1. It is taught by rote, by ear, not by reading the syncopated rhythms, but still students are exposed to those more complicated rhythms right away. Another aspect that will ask a lot of a beginning student is the rote memorization. So there are a lot of rote songs included in level 1 and also in level 2, which are taught by ear from the teacher to the student. Some students pick up on this very quickly and are able to remember what they learned in class by ear when they get home. Other students might really struggle to remember what the teacher showed them in class once they get home. By that same token, everything in the first book is written on the staff. So there are no pictures or off-staff notation whatsoever. It's all on the staff. Now the intention is that many of these songs will be taught by rote, as I mentioned, but still the student might have to very quickly pick up on some staff cues, and they are staring at very mature looking songs, even the simple starter songs, because they move back and forth from black keys to white keys, and so they're showing syncopated rhythms and they're showing sharps and flats. So whether reading notes on the staff is officially introduced right away or not, the student will kind of have to start to pick up on those clues rather early. Students will also be asked to have quite a bit of finger independence and hands together coordination at the beginning of their piano journey. So this might not be the series for a young beginner because they're going to have a little bit of dexterity going into level 1, or they might need to spend extra time on certain songs just to get them hands together. And as we move into the level 2 and level 3, students will be exposed to real original classical pieces a little bit earlier than that would happen in other piano method book series. So for the most part, we are looking at pretty intense ear training and technique skills introduced early on and challenging the student at every level. And then the fact that there are no pictures or off-staff notation, students are looking at real music on the staff from day 1. Let's talk about positions. So there are no hand positions in any of the core lesson books of Piano Safari. No positions whatsoever. In level 1, students will be finding their starting position by naming the first right hand note, naming the first left hand note, and then placing the indicated finger on it. So they are kind of all over the place as far as positions go. And even when students happen to land in a position that would be familiar to us as teachers of other methods, it's not called the position that we would call it. Positions are not mentioned at all. So in level 1, either the student will be naming the first note if it's one of the 2 notes that they've learned, and we'll talk about that in a second, or they will be given a picture of the keys. The first note only is shown on the picture, and then they need to place their hands for the rest of the notes. So I can confidently say that a student working through the Piano Safari method would not get locked into playing any one position, ever. Positions, that word does not exist in Piano Safari land. In level 1, as I mentioned, there are a lot of rote songs, and these are taught from teacher to student by ear. They are not reading the music. And these songs have a surprising combination of black keys and white keys. So students will have to navigate a lot of like chromatic scales and chromatic passages right away in level 1. So from a position standpoint, they will definitely be moving black keys, white keys, high, low, all over the place. They will definitely not be stuck in one position. They will be moving all around. In the level 2 books, they'll end up landing in some pentascales as we know them, like some 5-finger positions, such as C scale, D scale, G scale, those sorts of things, but they are never called a position. So it's just finding the first note and then placing that finger on that note, same as level 1, but they're going to land in some recognizable positions, even if it's not written as such on the page. In level 3, all hints are thrown out the window. So in level 3, students are expected to flow freely from note to note, full octave scales and crossovers and moves with no hints, no circled finger numbers, no red numbers, and no starting notes in level 3 either. So by the time they get to level 3, the idea is that they are reading fluently with no anchors or hints at all. Next, let's look at notation. Piano Safari uses an intervallic reading approach. And what this means is that students are not learning this is C, this is D, this is E, this is F. On the staff, they are learning one note and then they are reading by pattern from there. So there's a ton of focus on reading seconds and thirds in level 1, fourths and fifths in level 2, tons of interval and pattern recognition work, both in the main repertoire book and also in the writing book, the theory book. And in a lot of ways, students will not actually know all of the names of the notes that they are playing, especially in level 1. That will come later. So in that regard, the note reading, the fluency, the music literacy, that's more of a long game. So that is actually kind of a slower approach, but the way that they approach it is by letting the students dive headfirst into notes on the staff from day 1. That's what they're seeing on the page. And then they hear it by ear. They learn to recognize the patterns. And then the idea is by the time they get to level 3, they are completely literate. They are fluent in reading music. They need no hints. They need no positions. It's just all ingrained. So that is the intention of the notation introduction schedule of Piano Safari. So here's how this works from level to level. In level 1, students are only exposed to 2 guide notes. So there's a page that introduces G4 for the right hand in the treble clef, and then C3 for the left hand in the bass clef. That's it. That's all they learn. So they know those 2 notes, they memorize those 2 notes only. And then they read by pattern from there. So most songs in level 1 will start on either a G or a C for the right and left hand, but it will be different fingers. So it's not like a position they get used to. It'll be different fingers, but that's their starting note. They are expected to recognize it and fill it in. And then if a song does not start on the 2 notes that they know, then they get the little picture of the key so they know where the starting note is. And as I mentioned, seconds and thirds are introduced and drilled right away in level 1 and throughout the book. And that's it. That's the extent of like the note speller approach or the guide note approach. It's just those 2 notes. Then in level 2, they add middle C as a guide note, which I would think they would know by then, but that's how the book introduces it. So then they learn middle C for right hand and left hand in level 2, and that's their third like guide note, landmark note. And then they are introduced to fourths and fifths. And of course, intervals are definitely emphasized and reviewed throughout the book. By the end of level 2, they are expected to be able to read any note on the staff and some ledger lines as well. So it's kind of amazing how this process works. We're not teaching them all of the notes one by one and then expecting them to remember all of those notes on the staff. Instead, we are introducing a system of reading music and then expecting for that to run its course by the end of level 2, and then they're fluent in music. So that's the philosophy. In level 3, as I mentioned, there are no hints, there are no starting notes, there are no positions. Students move freely with their right and left hand, crossovers, lots of ledger lines, and some real classical literature that they are reading. So I believe the fluent music literacy completes itself by the end of level 2. Ideally. Okay, I've got 2 more categories that are like more like the nuts and bolts. I know it's a lot of talking right now, but we are going to listen to some examples and talk more about how the levels work together and the books that are available. But stick with me through theory and technique. Okay, let's talk about theory next. There's a theory book, a separate writing book to go along with each level 1, 2, 3. There is a little bit of theory incorporated in the repertoire book too, so if you just had that one book, it could kind of serve as an all-in-one book. The theory book is pretty standard. I mean, it's not all that exciting, it's pretty standard. I do like that it focuses on intervals a lot because I think intervals are so important, so it kind of reinforces what we're working on in the repertoire book, that we're like reading by pattern. There's a variety of activities within the theory book. there's a lot of copying. I noticed there was a lot of copying in all of the levels. And I will note that by the time you get to level 3 theory, it's pretty intense. I've never seen a level 3 theory book this intense. There's like figured bass and like Roman numeral chord progressions and harmonizing in a melody and all that kind of stuff, which I think of as like high school level music theory. But they get into it. They really get into it by level 3. And let's talk about technique. Piano Safari is big on technique. I would say that it expects a lot from beginner students, technical skill wise, to the point where I just think they're going to be spending a little more time on each song, putting it together, and they'll be spending more time in each book. So these levels are pretty comprehensive, and we'll talk about that in a second. For level 1, there isn't a separate technique book, but technique is definitely interwoven into the repertoire book for level 1. As I mentioned, students are expected to do black and white keys together, a lot of chromatic passages. They are moving all about the keyboard, and they are doing some hands together coordination that maybe wouldn't be expected of beginners in other method series. Piano Safari uses animal terms to describe the different technical skills for the beginners, which is pretty cute. So for example, like a heavy arm weight would be the lion paw. Whenever you can associate an animal with a concept, that's always a big hit with beginners. Level 2 and 3 have their own separate technique books, along with technique incorporated in the repertoire books. You could get away with not having these, but these are also very intense. This is where they get the scale pattern recognition that maybe they wouldn't get in the core lesson book. So they are going to be learning patterns in the level 2 technique book, and then they're going to be transposing that pattern into like either a handful of different 5-finger scales or like all the 5-finger scales. So by the end of this book, they are fluent in like all 12 major and all 12 minor pentascales, like the 5-finger scales. And then in level 3, they're going to kind of do the same thing, but with full octave scales. They even get into 2 octave scales in the level 3 technique book, along with inverting chords and arpeggios and all of that. So overall, I would say that the Piano Safari method series as a whole focuses heavily on technique and then lets note reading kind of take a back seat and develop naturally. That's how I would describe that, as opposed to, I guess the opposite would be drilling notes, note reading, notes on the staff, memorization of notes, and letting technique take a back burner, which some other method books maybe tend to lean more towards that. Okay, now let's get into the fun part. We're going to hear some of the music out of this. We're going to talk about like how the levels work, what are some of these resources that are sitting behind me. If you are enjoying my piano method reviews and you want to see more like this, hit that like button. It lets me know that yes, I should keep making reviews like this. So next, let's do an overview of what the levels are, how far each one takes you, and the overall path of the series. There are really only 3 levels of the Piano Safari method series. They do have like a preschool beforehand mini method called Piano Safari Friends, and then they have like an older beginner series, and then a couple books for the advancing student. But really there's 3 core levels. Now these levels cover a lot. So every repertoire book, the main core book, they're over 100 pages long. So we'll call level 1 like covering everything that a student would learn in a primer level plus everything that they're going to learn in a level 1. And then level 2 is a true level 2. So that covers everything that you would get in like the blue and orange books for Faber, or like a 2A and a 2B in other similar methods. And then level 3, I'm going to go ahead and say that level 3 is an advanced level 3. Kind of in some way starts at the same place as like a level 3A in a comparable method series, but it takes you farther, and in some ways it's already more advanced from page 1 of level 3. So in level 3, students are playing real classical music that I might not throw at a level 3 student who is in like 3A of Piano Adventures, if that makes sense. And by the end of level 3, so by the end of the 3 core levels, students will be at like a true intermediate level. So unlike other series, this is going to take them farther into like reading real classical literature and advanced technical skills. Where would they go after they finish level 3? Well, there really isn't like a level 4 created by the Piano Safari authors. Like I said, they do have a couple of books that are for the advancing student, and those are like a sight reading book, a technique book, but not a core lesson book. And just by looking at what level 3 is, I'm going to go ahead and say that their intention is probably that after level 3, you would dive straight into real classical literature. So you would get like a literature collection or book of some sort, and then you would supplement that with maybe their sight reading book and their technique book, and maybe pick out a theory book to go along with it. But there really isn't anything after level 3 as like an official core lesson book. Okay, the aesthetics of this series are very unique. So on the inside, as I'm sure you've already noticed, it is just black and white with very simple illustrations of the little animals for each page. I would say that these books kind of give like a homemade vibe, and I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. I mean, you're talking to someone who makes my own resources. I just find it interesting that they kind of chose to keep this homemade feel. It's just something about like the fonts that are chosen and the way that they use like actual black and white photos. It kind of gives me like those 70s, 80s piano method book vibes where like they had the actual pictures of the hands in black and white. So that's just kind of the aesthetic on the inside. And then on the outside, I feel like it's totally different. I feel like the outside is very professional looking and beautifully designed. The back cover has like this texture to it. It's like very thick paper, and then we have the nice spiral binding. Now I do have to mention one thing that was just driving me and my students crazy as we were trying to use, not this one because it sits horizontally, but with the spiral bound level 2 and level 3 books, they're floppy. They're like we had to put something behind them because they would flop back and they couldn't see the top line. So this one isn't as thick as the back of the level 1 for some reason. So I don't know if it was thicker, if it wouldn't flop. And probably people with like upright pianos don't have this problem at all. Anything with this style, it's floppy. So just be aware that you have to put something behind it. But besides that one little setback, I mean, the outside, the design is very nice. And then the theory and technique books are saddle bound, so they're like stapled. Now let's talk about the song selection, which I feel like is one place where this method series really shines and then kind of surprised me towards the end of the series. So let me explain. First of all, the authors of these books know what they're doing as far as composing. It's very clear that a lot of research and care has gone into the making of these books, the way that they are designed. It's clear that they started from scratch, that they weren't copying anybody, and that they went with their heartfelt philosophy on how to teach the kiddos the music. So love that about it. And they've included a lot of originals by them in the level 1 and 2, and then some in level 3. In level 1, the nice thing about all of the rote pieces that are included in that is that students are playing really cool sounding songs right away. Because they're not limited to that one little position in the middle and notes that they can read. Like I'm just comparing it in my head to Wonder Keys, where the songs don't sound that great for a pretty long time because they're literally only playing songs with like those 4 notes that they know for the longest time. Whereas this book takes the complete opposite approach. You're like, let's move all over the keyboard, push the pedal down, white keys, black keys. We're gonna make this sound amazing. And who cares if you know what any of the notes on the staff are yet? So totally different approach. And so in that regard, students are able to make beautiful sounds from the first lesson. Now, whether or not they remember how to play those songs at home is another discussion, which we will talk about in a second. But in the lesson, when you're there helping them, they are able to make beautiful sounds right away. So I think that the music, as soon as they hear the pieces, they're going to be excited to learn them. And that goes a long way. Now, after looking through the repertoire level 1 and level 2, I cracked open level 3 expecting to see like amazing, higher level, original pieces. And there are a few, but I'll tell you, most of the pages in the level 3 repertoire book are actually original classical etudes. So your Gerliet and your Kohler and, you know, all of those like etude masters that we all know. That's okay. So level 3 repertoire, it felt like another technique book to me. It's all etudes, like the entire book is etudes. And what I felt like it was missing is like music for the sake of music, you know? Now I will say that the authors are masters of making good sounding etudes. Like the etudes that they write in level 2 and level 3, it's clear the technical skills that they're going for, and they make it sound beautiful at the same time, which is why we love those classical etudes that have been passed down for generations that accomplish something and sound good. However, that's like the entire level 3. So if you had a student who, say, was interested in jazz by the time they got to that level 3 age, and they weren't really interested in diving full force into the classical world, they would not be into level 3 at all. Like, it is all classical etudes almost. So I was really surprised by that, and I wish that maybe they would have created some alternative supplemental books for the level 3, or maybe added some more variety within that. I'm not sure what the thinking was on that, but I will say that if a student sticks with this series through level 1, 2, and all the way through level 3, they will be ready to go into real classical literature for sure. So if that is your goal for them, and if that is okay with them, this series would be great. For others, not sure about the level 3. Okay, so let's listen to some examples so you can kind of hear the progression through the levels. Okay, so level 1 is kind of divided into, you've got your rote pieces, which are going to sound quite complex and beautiful. And then you have your reading pieces, which are obviously going to be simpler so the student can read what's happening on the staff on the page. So let me give you an example of the sound of both of those from the level 1 repertoire book. Level 2 also has reading pieces and rote pieces. The student will be able to kind of pick up on some visual cues from the rote pieces by the time they get to level 2, but they're still mostly taught by ear. So let's hear an example from level 2 repertoire. And then let's hear some examples from level 3. There are no rote pieces in level 3 because students are fluent in reading music by this point, so they don't need to learn things by rote. So let's hear some examples from level 3 repertoire book. Okay, let's talk about the pricing. So exactly how much are these books? The repertoire books, which as I mentioned are all over 100 pages, spiral bound, are $18.95 as of today. All 3 levels offer a theory book, and if you want to add that, it is $10.95. There's no level 1 technique book, but you can add a level 2 technique book for $10.95 or a level 3 technique book for $16.95. And then there's another product that I haven't spoken about yet, and let's take a look at it. All 3 levels offer a pack of sight reading and rhythm cards. So these packs are $14.95. They are split up by level, and each card offers a sight reading on the keys and then a rhythm at the bottom. So I can show you an example from the end of the level 1 pack. As I mentioned, there were only those 2 landmark notes introduced in level 1, and here they are. It's the G, which here they're asking finger 1 to go on G, and then it's the C for the bass clef, and here they're asking the pinky to go on C. So they read the line for the right hand, they read the line for the left hand, and then they're going to clap the rhythm at the bottom. So I could see these being a nice resource either for in lessons or at home practice. However, don't you think that it would get old if you did these all the time? Like, there are so many of them. So I think maybe some gamification or something like that would probably make these a little more fun. And I could see students getting into that. They had like some incentives or like a chart where they were trying to get so many cards done or something like that. But these are available for all 3 levels. Availability. Unlike other piano method books, you cannot get these on any website besides thepianosafari.com. So you have to get them direct from the source. So there aren't like sales really or anything like that. However, you can buy a pack for each level. There's a teacher pack and a student pack, and you would save some money if you kind of buy them in bulk. So go to their website and check it out. I'll have it linked down in the description. Amazon will have one of their books pop up, but I wouldn't recommend ordering these books from Amazon because they're generally uppriced a lot for some reason. Like, I saw someone selling the level 1 repertoire book on Amazon and it was like $32 or something like that, but it's $18.95 list price from the website. So I would steer away from Amazon. And if you see Piano Safari books on another website where we can get a deal, please share that down in the comments. So let's just summarize what is truly unique about this method book series. Piano Safari is unique in its dedication to intervallic reading, and therefore its complete abandonment of hand positions and its lack of systematically teaching notes on the staff one by one. So I think that's probably the most unique aspect of this method. Along with that, the heavy use of rote songs in level 1 and level 2 is definitely unique, and the fact that they are notated completely on the staff without hints or pictures or off-staff notation. Another thing that is unique about this method is the challenging technique, what it asks of the students, and how technique heavy it is, like how much technique is included in the repertoire and then of course in the separate technique book. The integration of sight reading both within the repertoire book and then with the sight reading and rhythm cards, there's a heavy focus on sight reading and setting students up on that path towards music literacy. And then I would say the fact that the levels are bigger in these big comprehensive spiral bound 100+ page method books, that's kind of unique rather than splitting it into smaller books. So it's a bigger investment, but the students are in it for longer. And last but not least, and I haven't mentioned this yet, there is teacher training available on pianosafari.com. So if you are interested in going full force and using this method, you can take the teacher trainings, and they have some different options with that. It's quite expensive. You will be spending a few $100s, but there is support and training available. And I don't know of another method series that really offers that, at least that comprehensively. All right, so time to give my personal opinion after spending some time with the Piano Safari method series. Piano Safari is definitely a unique approach from cover to cover, from level to level. I believe this method requires a commitment from the teacher along with training and a plan. I don't think that this is a method book that kind of teaches itself like most methods are. It also requires a lot of the student. So students are challenged from week to week, and they might be spending more time on a page, and they might be spending more time in the book because the book is more comprehensive. Likely the student will need some sort of support at home, a lot of assistance from a parent, and it will really help if they have a musical parent at home to help them, at least at the beginning of the journey with these rote songs. I think that a successful Piano Safari student would really need to be inspired by music in and of itself because of like the lack of frills, because of the constant mental challenge that this series offers, and because they're not instant gratification moving on from page to page, book to book as quickly. I think that the student is going to need to just love music for the very essence of it, for its sound. So I can't picture using just this method with an entire studio of students because I just don't think that it would be for every student. I think that the prevalence of the fun rote songs in level 1 is a great idea. It gets students playing wonderful sounding music that they're excited and inspired by right away. However, I do see a challenge there where the student is not going to remember, and this was my experience personally. The student did not remember how the song went when they got home. Even listening to it, they still couldn't figure out where those notes were that I had showed them. My concern would be that they are 100% relying on what showed them and not connecting it to what's on the page, which would further delay their reading of the music and would also require some sort of support at home. Otherwise, I would just be showing them week after week at the lesson, but as soon as they get home, they're forgetting. So we never really learn the rote songs. That would be my concern on those. Along with it, I would be afraid that if the student really didn't get the fluency in level 1, they would be completely lost when they got to level 2. So you might have to move sideways for a little bit before they would even be able to read the first songs in level 2 that they're expected to read. And the sight reading rhythm cards, I think those are a unique idea, and I could see myself integrating those into lesson time. I couldn't see a student completing like every card in the pack for all 3 levels though, because they are a little bit dry unless we gamified it in some way. So that's my overall opinion, the good and the bad. So who do I think should invest in checking out this method? If you are seeking a method that tosses hand positions completely out the window, you love using improvisation and playing by ear, you want to foster great sight reading skills and long-term music fluency or literacy, and you're looking for a method series that prepares students to dive full force into a traditional classical literature approach when they get into high school and college. If that describes you, then you should definitely check out Piano Safari. And if that's not exactly you, maybe you're sitting where I am, where you can definitely see some value in this approach, but you're not ready to throw out all of your favorite method books just yet. So what questions do you have after seeing this little overview? Please put those in the comments. And if you currently use Piano Safari, I want you to comment below because we have questions for you. We have questions. We want to know how this works. We want to know how you get your kiddos to play those rote songs at home. We have questions. So let's continue the discussion and watch for a part 2 of the Piano Safari journey. If you're curious what piano method books I do use currently, then check out this video. But thanks for sticking with me to the end. I will see you on the next one.